a call, and I'd say we probably got two of the people here who know more about online auctions than half the industry. So one thing I thought we could, well, you could, you sort of made the switch to online being, shall we say, the dog, and live auctions the tail. What, about 2 years ago? Seems like.
Well, not really, Carl. It's been the first. I'm lucky because the first auction that we did with my company when I started in 2006 was an online only sale, and so we didn't have any legacy issues coming in. That helped us a ton get the momentum in that direction. We continue to do live auctions of both real and personal property for a few years, and then quickly moved to online only for our personal property auctions. And we've only for personal property we only do the live sale when we're obligated to do so by a statute, and that usually means we'll be working for a sheriff. And it's been a while since we've done that. And then with our real estate business, began to move that direction online only in 2009, and now have moved all of our sales online only, with the exception of foreclosures, which again by statute in Tennessee we're obligated to do at live auction, and then also with the exception of large tracts of land that are being cut up and sold in a multi-par sale. That we'll still do live if we've got a good enough project to do it that way.
So how uh, what system are you using currently, Will?
We use Maxinet for our bidding platform.
How about you other guys?
We're using our proprietary software, Online Auction Solutions.
We're using Maxinet as well. Ray, I'm curious. I saw your system the other day, and didn't even know I ended up there, and I thought, hey, this is the new KBid rig. When was it that you launched that?
We launched that in April 4th. And it's really been pretty problem free. I mean, having your own software gives us the ability to respond to both the needs of our clients, which would be our affiliates, and we take a lot of input from the bidders, and we're able to quickly adapt and roll out new features.
You were using Maxinet, of course, before pushing out your own. How was the release received by your affiliates?
By the affiliates, it was very, very well, because it gives them much more autonomy. One of the problems that I had with Maxinet is we couldn't grow the business fast enough because of the limitations of Maxinet as far as turning over large security aspects of the software to another party. This allows, what we're doing now allows an affiliate to log in and post their own auction. So it's helped them. The the initial hiccup that we had, as with anybody with a large bidder base, some of the bidders squawked because basically they didn't like the fact that it was different from what we were using before. But you just respond to all the concerns, and you change the biggest complaints that you hear, and you make public what you're doing. And it actually went very, very well. We received very few complaints now, and our feedback is primarily positive.
Well, I cut you off a second ago, but you were talking about Maxinet and about to say something else.
We've used it since 2006, and we've built a lot on top of it. I understand what Ray's talking about with some of the security issues, and we have been able to develop some ways of pushing data into Maxinet that addresses some of that. So our affiliates and contractors don't interface directly with the Maxinet login the way you normally would. But I can understand the need, for sure. I'd be curious to see what you got, Ray. I haven't looked at it. Send me a link if you don't mind.
I would be happy to do that. And I believe I've got a card of yours with your email address on it. So,
Ray, I visited your booth at Conference and Show, I believe, but took me a minute to make the connection there.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have two companies that we work with. Right now I'm wearing my KBid shirt because that's primarily day-to-day what we do. And then OAS, or Online Auction Solutions, is our software product. So we are pushing that slowly but surely. One of the nice things about actually having another business, an auction business, is that we don't have to go too fast And we've brought on, we actually have one other client that uses the software on the East Coast, and we're working with 2 or 3 others to get that going. And what we're doing then with the some of the larger issues that they want to take care of, we're actually incorporating that into the software as we bring them on.
What are how many options are on the table now? What do auctioneers have to choose from? Anybody?
My opinion is you have MaxNet, you have AuctionFlex, and then it's some of the other platforms. You have BidSpot, or not BidSpot, or ProxyBid would probably tell you that they're a platform in that same way. We kind of don't go that direction. But as far as that goes, I think there's one other one out of the Carolinas. They're usually at the conference and show.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
And then there's something called Cuss. But to me, it all depends. The software choices that you have depend upon what you want to do with the business. We made a conscious decision that we primarily are going to stay out of unlike what you're doing, we stay out of the audio and video feeds. So we are an online only format. My biggest issue with that is tying everything all together and not either killing the online or killing the live part or killing the online part. We tried to combine them very, very early on, and did not get rave reviews when we did it. So we just made a commitment towards one direction.
I know with my clients that I deal with the most, well, particularly John Dixon has experimented some with the timed auction, but the online only, but tends to gravitate toward what they call simulcast. I guess we got all those terminology things to work through. Over a year's time, they're probably selling 40 to 50% of their assets. Keep in mind, we're talking about bank-owned properties, but a lot of lots and that sort of thing. But with a regular following of particularly investors, they're selling pretty near half, and sometimes a little bit more than half online, or to online bidders, I should say.
Which means that they're selling half to live bidders. So, to me, it makes it, there are no two businesses that are exactly alike, and I would never say that somebody has the correct solution for everybody else out there. So to me, it's go with what works for you. We've been online only without having the live component to it since 2005.
PJ, welcome aboard. Looks like you finally made it on.
Finally got the camera working. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, looks like you've been on and off here throughout the whole time. So glad you got it stabilized.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Anybody who wants to take that, but Will, maybe in particular, what have you found to be the biggest challenge over the past year and a half in getting your assets up, presented, and clerked, and so forth?
We found it was an enormous challenge to manage the process from the top down, and have made some big changes in our business to make that more of a bottom-up process, where we were trying to write a manual and run a business that worked kind of like a McDonald's franchise, where everything's supposed to be the same, work the same way, with the same materials and the same quality and the same experience across the board, and utterly failed to do that. It's really management intensive to do it, and I realized that we were trying to solve a problem that it would be great if we were able to solve it, but it was a problem that's better avoided. And so we've given up on that, and then we moved the decision making way down into the hands of the person who's actually making the contract with the seller. And then that same person is also carrying out the catalog production, carrying out the inspection, carrying out the removal, and supervising every aspect of the sale themselves. And for us, that works much, much better, because the decision-making and the consequences of the decision-making are aligned. it goes against thousands of years of history in economics, where you'd think that if you had some specialization that you could really benefit, but not in this business, as far as we've been able to tell. That it's the efficiencies come from being able to put the right decision in the hands of the party who's going to feel the feedback, and that's been a big innovation for us over the last 6 months of this year, and we're really looking forward to how it will work for us next year. I think it's probably something very similar to what Ray's done with his network, is essentially looking at building out a healthy platform and provide support for affiliates who are out there making the decisions and putting the sales together and managing the consequences of all those decisions.
So I have a big follow-up on that, which is, how has that shift in your practice translated to the buyer experience, the bidder experience, someone who was used to participating in your events when you had quality control on them, and now is faced with experiences that may differ wildly from auction to auction, if I understand what you've just explained.
Yeah, fortunately, a lot of the same people are involved, and so they benefited from some of the training, and that's probably one of the benefits that we are still seeing, is that those folks now that had been full-time employees are now independent contractors managing their own sales, and so they know and have a good idea as to what's expected, and I don't think it's that much different. That may change if we bring on people who don't come from that background, but it's definitely a challenge. But I think it's a matter of clear communication of expectations, and then trying to keep a good line of communication between me and ultimately our clients, and checking up to make sure our contractors are performing the way they should.
I know, just in tracking the conversations in the Facebook Dec group and so forth, there seemed to be a lot of auctioneers experimenting with different ways of getting the photos uploaded and that sort of thing. And it strikes me, with the number of items that you're dealing with, sometimes accuracy could occasionally be an issue. Anybody want to speak to that? When you have 300 or 400 items in one sale, how big of a problem is just accuracy of information and tracking?
Are you talking tying the picture to the item and making sure you're getting that right?
The right picture, the right description,
Well,
right sizes.
do it. Obviously, it's like anything else. There's no magic that happens. People will make mistakes, and you have to make sure that you try and catch those. But as far as making sure that lot number 46 is actually the correct picture for lot number 46, one of the things that I've always tried to do is, when you tag the item, I like to be able to see the tag in the picture to the degree possible. That way, any errors are glaring errors. There's a lot of automation in getting things uploaded with regard to your ability to upload pictures and automate the process. You're not renaming photos like crazy. Anything can make an error, but that's why this is not a 100% automated process. It's got its areas of weakness, and that's what you have to watch for when you're doing it. So to just post an auction and think that you got it right because you did it is not very bright, I don't think. So you got to check it. You got to have a lot of eyes on the ball, or on the page, to make sure that everything's right. Plus, when you are wrong, we got 190,000 bidders that are just waiting to tell us when we make a mistake anyway. So it's all good. You catch it and you fix it.
What kind of numbers are we getting out there? Speaking of which, are we still seeing situations where we get a glut of bids the last 24 hours, for example?
Last 24 minutes, to be more specific.
That's a good point. What you were saying, Ray, about getting things wrong. There's a certain. It doesn't really matter what you have done up until the significant bids begin to come in, and we've seen that to be true, especially for our real estate auctions, where a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to weed out people that they don't want bidding on a piece of real estate because they're not qualified. or they make somebody nervous. But it really doesn't. We find it doesn't particularly matter until the last 24 hours, and then we pay a lot more attention if we get a new bidder during that period of time. And if you make a mistake on a description as well, you can correct it up until that point, and generally have a good outcome.
You raise a good point of direct communication with bidders. I know that. Oh, gee, I think Aaron. I think Purple Wave was the first company I remember that was really. When I first met up with you guys, you were still doing live auctions there in Manhattan, and also had the bidding going on back in the room. But now everything's online, correct? Has been for a couple of years.
Yeah, we've been exclusively on the internet since 2009.
And so obviously that's worked out. But in doing this, I know this is true for Will too. But you guys have a lot of direct communication with your sellers, correct?
Oh yeah, yeah, with our sellers and with our bidders and our buyers. Just because we're on the internet doesn't give us the ability to turn a blind eye to being people and offering excellent customer service to the community.
Just because it's online, an online auction does not mean it's an anonymous or impersonal auction.
Exactly. In fact, I would argue that we know more about our bidders now than we ever could have at a live auction. We've got all of their information and know who is bidding on every single thing that we have. Whereas we might only know. I mean, yeah, we might have had names and addresses and phone numbers of the bidders, but we didn't know the story of the bidders who were bidding on the items until we had a buyer picked out at a live auction, and now we know everything about our bidders, and that's hugely valuable to the job that we do to our sellers for our sellers.
You have a more relaxed time frame for getting that information and establishing that contact, right? With a live auction, somebody walks in, you don't have any idea who they are until they get there and get registered. And hopefully they got their cashier's check if it's one that requires that.
But I think it's even deeper than that. To Aaron's point, in a live auction, even with the registrants, you have a history trail of the winners. For the most part, when everything is done verbally, you're not really tracking the people who bid and didn't win. In an online auction, every bid is a piece of history, and it's data mining that information that's going to enable you down the road to put the right item in front of the right buyer, or know who the potential buyer is for any given item because of their bidding history, which the history in a live auction to some degree could be lost.
Somebody say something. I don't have to fill all the space here. This is a round table.
I'd be curious to know what the number one trend in our business is going to be going into 2015. What are we going to see? What's going to rock our world?
What do you think it's going to be, Will?
I'm going to reserve my opinion until I hear from some other folks.
That's my trick. You're not supposed to know that one.
I don't know if it's going to rock anybody's world, but I know that there are a lot of auctioneers that I've talked to in the last couple of years who have been really relying heavily on Facebook to get the word out about their live auctions that they've been having. And one of the changes that Facebook announced here early this first quarter is that they will they plan to stop including content from pages in the feeds of users unless that content has been boosted or paid for. And I think it's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of auctioneers who saw Facebook as a get out of marketing free card. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
That's a good pivot, because we don't, we're not stuck with our topic, and we can always come back to it. But let's chase that rabbit for a second, because I've also, I've been looking at that pretty hard, and I've started suggesting to my clients that they bring their Facebook pages back to life, although I'm not sure that it matters in terms of the reach, whether you have any likes or not. If you don't get any organic reach, what's your interpretation of that?
Yeah, we've been paying a little bit, just a little trickle budget for new page likes, and have had a pretty good degree of success with that over the last year and a half. And our posts now are getting the reach that only paid posts would, here, a year or two ago. And I was certainly, I've never been hugely bullish on Facebook as a valuable marketing platform for what we do, but I was certainly disappointed in Facebook's announcement, and am curious to see how it will actually end up playing out. I certainly think there is value there, but I think we need to start looking at Facebook just as we look at print or any other medium, in that you pay for the eyes that see your content.
I'm not sure how it plays out in the terms of agreement either, Aaron. You're usually a little bit more on top of that than I am, but I know for myself that the auction communications page, which is my company page, has virtually no followers. I've never tried to have any, and because it's never been the source of my leads. I do get clients through Facebook, but it tends to be just somebody who sees me online and contacts me and says, "Hey, I got this project coming up. What would it cost to do a release on it," or something of that nature. Never any kind of mass marketing. It's just more a matter of having relationships and another way for people to reach you. But that's been more through my personal ID rather than my company brand. But at a certain point, that could also be violating the TOA, wouldn't it?
In what way?
What are the Facebook rules regarding use of personal separation of business and personal accounts?
Only that for accounts, it must be a person. Facebook's analogy is every birthday can have one user account. So if every person gets an account, but every account can have multiple pages for business, and it's the business pages that are going to be affected by Facebook's change, and they're going to probably be on the lookout even harder than they have been in the past for spoofed user accounts that look like business entities or non-people.
I've already seen some people getting automatically turned from a person that had a business page going. They just convert them right to a page without even telling them. It's happening already.
That's fantastic.
They want to make that money. It's been pretty effective too.
I've always been the guy that will find a page like that and use the report this profile function on Facebook. I'll tell on them because it's just polluting the community.
Speaking of polluting the community, who's been paying attention to the news on auction.com and the show bidding lawsuit there?
This is the first I've heard of it.
Oh, okay.
It's a huge deal in California. They've for a long time they've bid on behalf of sellers up to the amount of the reserve, and they've done it without disclosing that they were doing that, which is a fairly common practice, and it is not against the law in most jurisdictions, so long as it's in a reserve format. But they've really angered some real estate folks in California. It didn't feel like that was playing fair, and so they've made a big issue out of it, and have I think they achieved a ruling against the practice in a court after filing suit against auction.com, and either that or they had a bill introduced in the legislature and have had that passed now, I believe. But anyway, that practice is no longer allowed without pretty cumbersome disclosure in California, and there are other jurisdictions that are paying attention to it.
There was unrelated, but not exactly. Isn't there also some kind of legal action or proposed legislation regarding shield bidders in South Carolina, or the announcement of bidding in behalf of a seller?
It probably stems from the same event. So in California, that it's achieved enough notoriety. I think that there are some other states that have picked up on it. but I don't know about South Carolina, Carl.
Yeah, somebody, I think Buddy Lee at John Dixon was telling me this morning that they picked up something to the effect in live bidding that every bid now under the proposal, every bid would have to disclose that they're bidding, that it's in behalf of a seller up to the reserve amount. I haven't really followed that, so that might be grossly incorrect.
That's pretty much the way it is in California.
So back to the online aspect, and back to Will's question. You know, what is ahead? Does anybody see any major technical changes? Major new competitors on the horizon? Is it getting more complicated from a competitive standpoint between auctioneers, for that matter?
I don't see it. As far as more competitive, yeah, things are always going to get more competitive. And my opinion has always been that you have to sell the service and the product as a whole. You're never long-term going to have an edge on product or price. Somebody's always going to come in and do it for less, and somebody's going to come in with the latest bell and whistle. You just have to do what you do and make the whole experience something that somebody wants to do, rather than constantly chasing your tail. We're not, in as much as we want to keep up to date with what our technology does, I don't chase technology for the sake of technology. I mean, there are some really cool things that we want to build into the software because we think they have a very specific purpose. I think the industry is extremely fragmented, and if anything, you might have, some consolidation with online. I mean, this is not a pitch. One of the reasons that we built our software the way we built it was we thought that people or companies pooling resources is probably a direction to go into the future, rather than everybody beating the heck out of everybody else. So that's kind of why we do things. We, one of the raps against us up here in Minnesota is, you let anybody be an auctioneer. Well, I don't know why I wouldn't. We ask them to get licensed, and they sell. So, it all works out. I just think that the further we go, the online bidding aspect is going to be more and more prevalent. And, if anything, yeah, there's always going to be a live auction somewhere. But I think that's going to get less and less, and the online is just going to take over more and more. Now, how much the simulcast aspect does remains to be seen. There again, that's all a matter of personal preference.
So if
any great changes in the next year, I mean, anything earth-shattering.
So if we go more and more in that direction, what happens to bid calling as an art form? Does it begin to take a back seat, or do the contests start to become a preserved art form, as it were?
Well, I could make a lot of people angry at me in answering that. I've never called a live bid in my life. And so I like watching the contests. I find them very, very interesting. I've always had a bit of a I don't want to call it a pet peeve, but one of the things that I look at when they have the champion auctioneer contest, and that's how they label it, I've always felt that's a championship bid caller contest. It's an auction is something else entirely. An auction, a bid caller is one aspect of an auction, just as a quarterback is one aspect of a football team. So, I think that as we go further, yeah, as far as its absolute skill required for the job, but I think there's people that are always going to do it. Because my opinion is benefit auctions, that belongs, I mean, to me, and this is personal, I think benefit auctions, I push them to a live format because, especially in a smaller gathering, so I'm not saying that St. Jude should be doing it live only, but if you have a small charity, I think live works better for them because you've got people who actually know each other, are trying to outdo one another, where on the internet, there's a degree of anonymity. So I think you lose some of that benefit. So I don't think it'll ever completely go away. I just think as a way to do business big time, it'll become less and less prevalent. But I am biased. It's catered online auctions.
So who's biased the other way?
Yes, exactly. Well, what you want to hear about bias the other way? We've had people in our organization within Minnesota who do not think that online-only companies should even be allowed to participate in our state association.
I remember back when Christy King was first talking about running for president, or maybe even when she was talking about running for the board the first time. One of the big issues then was, do we even want those online people as to be members of NAA? I think that's been resolved some time back, hasn't it?
Well, perhaps on NAA, I haven't. We still get pushback on the state level.
I would say it definitely has. NAA is past that, I think.
I don't know that was ever a serious issue by enough of a percentage of the membership to matter. I think you're always going to have those types of grumblings, but I don't know that was even, even in those years, I don't think it was ever anything that was a serious thing, to my memory anyway.
And not near as much grumbling now as there have been in the past either.
Oh yeah, the grumbling decreased.
So we've reached a conclusion that grumbling is on the wane.
Yeah.
At least
plenty. Yeah, not about that. Plenty of other grumbling.
Well, what else did you guys want to cover? Like I said, I just used this for an entry point, but we've got 20 minutes left. We can spend it talking. We got a few other folks coming in and out.
I've got a question. Go ahead, Will.
Oh, I was going to say one of the thing that I had on my mind about the answer to my own question is that I think the way that we accept payment is going to change quite a bit in 2015. I think that might be the year that some of the alternate means of payment and some of the monopoly of the credit cards also begin to diminish. I think there's going to be a lot of different other networks that allow for payments to be handled faster and better, more secure, and more like cash. And may gain some traction this year and what they haven't in the past. I'd love to accept Bitcoin in my auctions because there's no such thing as a Bitcoin chargeback, but it's not prevalent enough.
Yeah, and with some of the changes that are coming down the pike regarding, I don't think we're going to get chip and pin this year, but I think we're going to get card and pin, or chip and card. I can't remember what we're going to get. There's some big changes coming with regard to the way that we can take credit card payments that are going to require new terminal hardware, or should require that anyway. And so along with that comes the option, if you're going to get new hardware, you're probably going to get something that's going to have at least the capability or the option to take things like Google Wallet and Apple Pay and some alternative forms of payment that I think we'll see a lot more prevalently with smaller dollar transactions. I'm not anticipating a huge shift in selling tons of ag equipment to Apple Pay quite yet, but I think that for a lot of smaller dollar transactions, I think we'll see percentages shift in payment type.
Who's going to prevail in this thing, Aaron? Between Google, what are the players out there? You got Google Wallet, Apple Pay, which seems to be coming back to life. What else is out there currently?
It's going to become more and more fractured, I think, just as originally there were, a couple of different types of email accounts. You had your AOL and your CompuServe, and now anybody can create an email service. I think that we're going to see similar things with payment networks. Certainly there's Apple Pay and Google Wallet. There's Dwolla. Is an interesting approach to taking payments that has created a new type of payment network. There's the consortium of vendors, and I can't for the life of me remember the name of it right now, but it was that they are trying to create a payment network outside of the traditional Visa, MasterCard Discover, American Express, that which we saw in the news here when Apple Pay came out, and these merchants declined to accept it because they had started creating their own system. And so I think this year there are 3 or 4 or 5 different networks that will be accepting payment, and I think in the future we will start to see sub-branded payment mechanisms that will use those networks as a means of sourcing or supplying that payment ability.
Sub-branded networks like Purple Pay or something.
K-Pay.
Yeah.
K-Pay, MaclaPay. What's it going to take for any of you to start using Bitcoin? Is it stable enough? Is it still too political, too stained? We all can tell you I've had concerns about it from the beginning from an image standpoint.
It's just not there yet. It's going to require somebody to treat it like a credit card, or to at least have a system that treats the transaction the way a credit card transaction is handled, with the commensurate amount of risk. And because you've got currency risk, because it's its own currency, and that's not good. So you don't want the volatility there. But the big advantage is that it functions instantaneously like a credit card would, but it's irrevocable. And that, for an auctioneer, it's perfect. The only problem is there's nobody who makes it easy to set up and actually work right now, and there are not nearly enough people who have it in order to make it viable either. But gosh, it would be ideal if it gains any traction. I'm all for it.
I will buy your second reason, but not your first. There are companies out there that are making it easy to accept Bitcoin, just as easy as it is to add a PayPal button to your site. You can add buttons and the ability to accept Bitcoin. But I certainly agree with your second reason why it's not working yet, which is that the adoption isn't quite there. I think if you look at the value chart here, over the recent term, it's been pretty stable. As far as the volatility, but I think that any auctioneer who's going to take Bitcoin really needs to have to use one of the providers that will allow you to immediately convert that to the corresponding value in cash. And those providers are out there. As far as long-term bullishness on the currency, I am certainly there, because there are a lot of companies out there that are built around Bitcoin, and they're still in the building phase. But I would certainly, I'm predicting that it's going to be worth quite a bit more here in the future, and will be much more prevalent as far as a payment mechanism. But again, I think we'll see smaller dollar transactions in Bitcoin, and not necessarily big transaction swings in the near term.
I will have to admit some ignorance with Bitcoin. The only thing that scares me is some of the things that I've heard, and that's that it essentially acts like a currency. I just wonder at what point has our government challenged Bitcoin at all? I mean, I hear these things about it, and like I said, I'm not fully well versed, but if you have something that's trying to become a currency, what is the long-term legality of that? Is the government going to piss and moan because somebody's stepping on their action?
Yeah, it was big in the news a year ago. And there were certainly some congressional hearings on it, and there were some determinations made by the people who make those kinds of determinations in the government. And it's been so long, I've forgotten it. And I think they came out and said that it's taxed like a commodity, or I honestly cannot remember. But yes, those determinations have been made, and it does function very similarly to a currency, and it is in use. I bought something with Bitcoin the other day. It was my first time, but it works.
So I would say, with regard to volatility, since you're looking at a conversion rate to be able to convert it to dollars, at what point do you decide what is a U.S. dollar worth versus a Bitcoin dollar? Because there is fluctuation in the U.S. dollar. I think that's where it gets confusing for me.
There are a ton of exchanges that are out there to where you can look at the current conversion rate. I think right now, and for the last several months, it has been just between $350 and $400 per Bitcoin. is kind of to give you an idea of where the value is. But it does certainly fluctuate up and down in real time. There's enough liquidity that you can get a current conversion rate at any time from any of the transactions into any of the global currencies.
So what about global currencies? Is that what Bitcoin is, essentially, an international currency then?
Yes.
It's not attached to any government, and it's also not subject to inflation or the same way because of the way it's created. And the reason I'm excited about it is because it's irrevocable, and it should ultimately end up being a lot cheaper than credit cards, but it should be easy to use, which is just for what we do is perfect because we had a really unfortunate incident this year where we sold a car online, and we had an individual pay for it with a stolen credit card number, and a fairly sophisticated team of Nigerians who laundered the credit cards. The real theft, you hear about in the news about all these people stealing credit cards. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. They actually have to be able to figure out how to squeeze a result out of those numbers and in a way that's not going to get them immediately shut down by the credit card companies, which is more difficult than you might think. And one of the ways they do it is to buy a car with a stolen credit card, then disappear, and then by the time they take off with the card, because we had payment at that point, and where we erred was the person who came to pick the car up didn't have the card in their possession, and we didn't ask to verify it, which is a pretty heavy burden if you think about it, having to do that for every significant transaction. But there's risk if you don't. So they took the car, and it was sawed into a million pieces, I'm sure, and sold into the aftermarket for replacement parts within a day, I'm pretty sure. And then we received a chargeback notice about a week, 10 days later, and at that point we'd already paid out the consignor. And so we have no car, no money, and a chargeback, and we had to reimburse our escrow account at that point. No alternative about it. That is a pain, and that's what you're talking about, chip and pen and presence of card being really important. But that kind of thing is someone who was actually, just think how hard, you would think it'd be really easy to get a benefit out of a stolen credit card, but it's really not. And so you think about what kind of effort it took for them to go through and do that. They're going through the effort of taking a $4,000 car and chopping it into pieces and selling those pieces. That's where the real benefit of having that stolen credit card is actually occurring to the person who stole it. And that's not the way you think it would work, but it does, because essentially it's not that Target or the ultimate consumer was the party that suffered. In that case, it was us. We were the party that was harmed, but the mechanism occurred because Target's credit cards were breached, or Home Depot's credit card security was breached, and the owner of the card was able to file a claim because they are protected by the credit card company, because the credit card company has the right through their merchant agreement to squash all the merchants. And so there you go. So essentially, that theft is a theft to a merchant, which we all are, that is not detectable, can't be traced, and there's certainly no effort to police it on any kind of scale. And that's a system that is a pretty good way to steal if you're a thief. And it's something that we're all vulnerable to, because we're willing to trade ease of collecting funds and speed in exchange for a little bit of risk, and that's where it bit us. At the time, we had a cap for credit card transactions of $5,000 per invoice, and we've since removed that. But we realize we've exposed ourselves to more risk there, because we're seeing more and more credit card transactions on our site, and we have pushed the cost of credit card transactions to our sellers. So we now in our contracts say that the exact cost of credit card processing will be deducted from every invoice we settle. We don't absorb those costs anymore, which is one of the reasons we did away with our $5,000 cap. And so we get money in a lot faster than we used to, with a lot less hassle, and no sellers have pushed back on us for the extra 2 3/4% that they're eating.
We push that to We actually push that to the buyer.
That's what you push the credit card cost to the buyer.
Yes. Now, okay, so I'm assuming that a Bitcoin it's not a physical object, so it lives somewhere in theory, right? So it's a piece of data somewhere.
It's a mathematical hash that is based on the entire history of hashing. Without getting too technical, yeah, it's basically the ability to prove uniqueness digitally, which is kind of a remarkable feat if you think about it. But yes, it's
So
all a hash.
I'm assuming that you would have a Bitcoin account.
You have a Bitcoin wallet, which you can store on your computer. You can store it in the cloud, or there are people who will actually print it out in very small type. It's just a big number basically.
Can that wallet be broken into and stolen?
If you do not protect it and encrypt it properly, yes, it absolutely can.
Doesn't it work kind of like the way that the Napster music service worked, where all the information was distributed across all the different parties, that there's a single copy of the entire history of Bitcoin that's kept in enough places at once, it'd be very difficult to disrupt.
Yeah, kind of. It's distributed. I would make an analogy more towards something like a BitTorrent rather than a Napster or a BitTorrent seek using DHT or distributed hash tables. Is how it actually works. But yes, you can prove that you have the unique key that describes the Bitcoin that you have, and it's a proof that's based on the other transactions in the chain.
So it's not fail-safe either, though.
Well,
What's that?
It's not going to be a fail-safe method either. Then going forward, I mean, at one point we all thought credit cards were the end-all be-all. There's all the security measures in place. I think Bitcoin is going to be the same thing at some point. That some people will figure out how to steal other people's information and do the same thing We'll just talk about with the car, isn't it?
You charge more. It's a tax. I mean, the theft is a tax on business everywhere. It always has been, always will be.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything eventually gets broken, right?
The math behind the Bitcoin is sound. The problem lies in so far any problems with the technology have lied in the implementation of the math. Just like good crypto, it's the math is good, but when you allow anybody to build a client, then that anybody might make some mistakes that make the contents of those Bitcoin wallets or the Bitcoin exchange problematic. That's what happened to Mt. Gox here, the premier Bitcoin exchange, a year ago or whenever it shut down, was because of problems the way that they implemented the technology and not necessarily problems in the math behind it.
Well, I think payment's going to be a big deal in 2015. That's the trend that I saw. What were you going to say before I interrupted you, Aaron?
I was going to ask you, since Carl kind of opened it up to any topics, and this is the first time I've had a chance to visit with you in a long time, and to hear of your change of heart regarding specialization. But I was curious the extent of that. A couple of years ago when we were planning the Internet Only Auction Summit, you were certainly beating the drum of specialization being one of the most important things that an auctioneer could bring into his or her company. And I was curious what the extent of your change of heart.
If you can find a way, I think on a macro scale, specialization is really important. If you're specializing in selling vintage and antique motorcycles, that's what you're going to sell, and you're going to draw worldwide if you're good at it. And I think that's the type of specialization that's got legs and is going to function. You see that play out in the marketplace every day. And I've been a specialist in luxury real estate when I first started with J.P. King back when I first met Carl. And we were specialists and sold $1 million homes and ranches and other real estate problems like that we solved. But the specialization of division of labor with the type of asset that we were dealing with, we found it too difficult to manage. We were just burning through enormous amount of hours without getting much benefit. and it probably has more to do with our inability to manage than it had to do with our employees' willingness to put in a hard day's work. And I know that is actually the case because I have the example in June. We went from 7 employees to 2, and then later in November to 1. But we went from there was 4 of those people who stayed on as contractors after, and I think pretty much without exception, they're making more net to them than we had been paying them, and we're making more on the auctions that they were involved in conducting. And it's simply a failure of management on our part to put the decision in the hands of the folks that needed to be making it. And that's just sometimes the best way to solve the problem is to avoid it. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make it work and how to turn the auction business into an assembly line. It just doesn't lend itself to that. There's too many variables, too many different ways to approach it.
What kind of decisions? What kind of decisions are you talking about? If you could give me an example, I'm curious. What kind of decisions are you talking about taking from and putting lower on the chain, for lack of a better way?
Well, whether to take the deal in the first place. So if you go out, a lot of times it's really hard to know whether the deal is good unless you go and lay eyes on the assets yourself and understand the logistics and understand the seller. That's a lot of work. And so if you're looking at, and if you have an initial indication that the deal is a $5,000 consignment, it's questionable right off the bat whether it's useful to do that or to even go out and do the research to figure out if it's worth chasing. But to a contractor who's not trying to manage an entire enterprise, they might relish the opportunity to go and book a $5,000 auction and find a way to work with a seller who's committed to sell and sign it up at a good, healthy commission rate and prosper, which we just weren't able to do. So we were trying to take those and service that type of client because that's the client that called us all the time, and we were never able to figure out how to make any money doing it, and so we stopped. But our contractors, they find a way to make money out of that situation all the time because their overhead is non-existent and their allocation of time is completely up to them. So they can look at it and say, this is a deal I think I'm going to make $75 an hour on because I'll knock it out. I'll have $500 worth of my time in it, and I'm ready to do it. And it's really, really great because we're putting the decision making back in their hands rather than saying, okay, here's your assignment, make the best out of it because we've just painted you in a corner. We're saying, here's the opportunity. If you think it's going to paint you in a corner, then don't pursue it. If you think it's great, then go and make the trade and just take care of the customer. That's the biggest decision, but then it's every decision that cascades on beyond that, which is, okay, do you sell the teapot by itself or do you sell the group of 10 teapots? Well, how do you give somebody guidance about that? Because it could be that one's worth $500. It could be one's worth $5. And how are you going to know? Are you going to become a teapot expert? If you do, that's a pretty hefty tuition to pay for in the $5,000 deal context. So that's the kind of thing where if you know that's the challenge you're facing, you might approach the seller a little bit differently and say, look, I'm going to come here and I'm going to be here from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 4:30. And what I would like for you to do is to line up all your teapots with a complete description that's adjacent to each teapot so I can go through, photograph the description, photograph the teapot in the right order, and go back and produce your auction, and I'll have it done by 5 o'clock and post it on the website. See, if you tee up the seller like that and they know that's what to expect, then you can rock and roll. But if they come in thinking that you're the teapot expert and they're going to kick back in the lazy boy, you're going to end up having to become the teapot expert to meet the promise that you made by not blowing a hole in that expectation in the first place. And that's what I mean by decision making, because it runs the gamut, and it's really, really it is a infinitely complicated problem that we were able to solve, but our contractors solve it day in, day out with great results.
It's just a matter of getting the economics right?
It's a matter of keeping promises and or avoiding making them. And that's not that hard. If you look at the whole business that way, you always have the option to avoid making the promise. Hey, no auctioneer can get themselves in trouble by not making a promise. And so a lot of people will make an implicit promise that then that completely torpedoes everything that they have got going at that point. You can see that in the big problems that a lot of auctioneers have with dealing and closing reserve auctions by not being realistic about seller expectations on different asset types, or not saying, look, it's not actually possible to figure out what this asset is worth, but it doesn't matter, or do you want to sell it? Sometimes that's the conversation. It's really, really complicated, but and it's so complicated that we find that the communication between the parties that are involved in trying to make that decision defeats the benefits that occurred from trying to have some specialization involved in what these parties were doing. And so basically comes down to accountability, just having one person making a promise to one seller for one contract and one auction. That is much easier to get right than it is to have a whole bunch of promises that were made by people who weren't the people who were going to be carrying out the work necessary to keep the promise in the first place, in a context where they were lined up with promises made by 6 other people in an auction with goods from 6 people. We're trying to make it a lot simpler because it's too hard otherwise, and it seems to be working great. We've done profitable auctions for our contractors and for us that have grossed less than $2,000, and we just have to do that hundreds of times a year. And if we do, it's great. It's great business. But the nice thing is, if we've got a party that's completely responsible for it, that's affiliated through us with the contract and is taking great care of our buyers and our sellers, it's a win-win. And then if we can gradually push that contractor to move from a $2,000 auction to a $20,000 auction to a $200,000 auction, it's great for everybody. That's the plan anyway. But we're not trying to be specialists except in a geographic market, because what we do is not portable. We have a big real estate practice as far as a percentage of our revenues, and we have a buyer community that expects us to trade in personal property that pays us back with their time and attention and helps our real estate business.
Well, we're a little over, and I'm fine to keep talking, but I think I'll go ahead and I wanted to go on before we get past it and start losing people. I wanted to ask you, technically, did this format work okay for you? Was the sound quality okay?
Yeah.
It looked real good on this end. And Aaron, back to your point, on my connection at least, the sound quality and video quality seemed a good bit better than when I've used Hangouts, for what that's worth.
I saw that this was being recorded. Is this going to produce a video for you to be able to port somewhere, or is it locked in Fuse, or what happens with the recording?
No, and I can link to that and show it to anybody I want. And in fact, I thought I could put a link to it in the forums, but since you guys are participating, that's up to you whether anybody said anything they don't want out. Seriously. But would anybody object?
Nope.
I'm fine.
I didn't hear anybody say anything real stupid.